Hello, so I shared a part one of Willowbrook documentary and part two where they followed up 10 years later. This is part three, 25 years after Willowbrook.
I was 33 years old. I always wanted a son. And God blessed me with a beautiful boy. He was born, looked normal, and I was so happy to have him. I was also friendly with a general practitioner, doctor friend of mine. He looked at me and said, "Sally," says, "I think your son is retarded." I was crushed. I didn't know. I was numb. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know. I can't believe it.
Because I was so young, I didn't understand what was the matter with Patty. She looked normal to me. I had no idea that there was something wrong. She kind of resembled a Raggedy Ann doll. She was cute. She had cute eyes. She had the cutest feet I ever saw. And she was really like a playmate to me. I look back now and realize that it was because she really hadn't developed appropriately. But to a child that age, that didn't matter.
Finally, the doctor told me that Margaret is mentally retarded, which I didn't understand what that was. But then after they sat down and explained it to me, the doctor said to me, "She will live with your love." So what I did, I just wrapped Margaret up in her blanket and says that from this day forward, my life is hers and her life is mine.
The seizures apparently became greater in number. It was strongly suggested and recommended to my parents that Louis be institutionalized and put away.
If I was able to keep him home, he would have been home. But he was so hard to handle, I felt more or less helpless.
In the 50s and stuff, this is where you didn't keep them at home. You sent them away. The family encouraged it. Your priest encouraged it. The doctor told you to do it.
Finally, as soon as there was a vacancy, we got him into Willowbrook. So I says, thank God. I was very happy that he was in Willowbrook. I figured it was a good place for him to be. He'd be safe there, maybe they can do something for him.
With clarity, I remember that day that Louis was taken to Willowbrook State School. My parents went home and each went into a separate room and just cried. We had, in a manner of speaking, sort of lost a member of our family.
Every one of these people share a common experience, the Staten Island institution known as Willowbrook. The horror stories of Willowbrook State School are now history, but many of the survivors and their families are very much alive today.
And I asked my mother, actually, if she ever remembered telling me that I had another sister who was disabled or retarded, and she said, no, we probably never said that. Somehow we would make the trips out to Willowbrook, and I would go with the family, and that was just somebody that they said was my sister. But I didn't know her. It was a stranger.
I was sad because Louis was being taken away from us. And it wasn't as though he was going for a trip to a hospital and with the expectation of coming back. Louis was being taken away from us forever. I was sad because he was someone that we'd grown accustomed to, and was someone that I think, really required a lot of us.
You all always saw the same people, but nobody ever talked. And we'd all kind of herd ourselves and get onto a public bus. And it was the Willowbrook bus, and would take us to Willowbrook. And yet, all these people who had so much pain in common, or so much insight to share with each other, never talked to each other because of the shame. You'd have a polite glance to somebody else, a nod of the head, a sympathetic kind of look. But even as a kid, we didn't play with the other kids that were there. And the parents never talked to each other. And then visiting time was over. That was it. And you brought Patty back, and that was the end of the visit until the next time.
The moment you walked into the buildings, in specific the building my brother was in, a strong smell of urine would hit you. A strong smell of feces. You'd hear the moaning and the sounds of people echoing like through the hallways. It was bizarre, but you wouldn't see any of these people. They were sort of hidden away somewhere.
And you'd walk up these long roads to Patty's building, and it was always very quiet. And then the air would be suddenly punctuated by a scream that would just curl your hair. And you didn't see where it came from, and you didn't know where it went to. The kind of moaning and screams. And then this tremendous quiet would be, overwhelm you again. And you'd walk, and then finally you got to the building. And the front of the building was, I remember, as being very palatial looking, almost welcoming in a sense. And you got inside, and something that always used to strike me is as you'd walk down the path to get to the doorway, you'd look up, and there was always somebody at the window saying, "Mommy, Mommy," or calling for someone. And you always saw them in silhouette. And you never knew who they were. All those years, you never knew who these people were.
Each family, I felt, had to do what it had to do for its own sake and survival. My family chose to take a more active involvement, and in the process, drag us along with them. It was a struggle, and it was a painful struggle, because it was as though we had no rights. When that individual was put in that state institution, simply because he's not at home with us anymore, doesn't mean we don't care. Simply because he's not able to speak doesn't mean he doesn't have anything to say.
Some people may vaguely recall the name Willowbrook in connection with some kind of a scandal in the early 70s that was exposed by the investigative reporting of Geraldo Rivera. But for those who lived there, it was a day-to-day struggle to survive. Life at Willowbrook held no expectations. It was endless days of emptiness with nothing to do and no one to talk to. With over 5,000 residents, it was the largest institution of its kind in the world. It was called a school, but fewer than 20% attended classes. In 1969, because of cutbacks, New York State instituted a hiring freeze and Willowbrook lost 600 employees. Then in 1972, the legislature cut the mental hygiene department budget to $600 million. The governor then cut it to $580 million. Willowbrook lost an additional 200 employees. The resident-to-staff ratio that should have been 4-to-1 dropped to 30 or 40-to-1. At times, there were 2 or 3 people to take care of 70 residents. Residents who shared the same toilet and contracted the same diseases. The average feeding time allocated for each individual, which should have been 20 to 30 minutes, dropped to a horrifying 2 to 3 minutes. Residents weren't capable of feeding themselves a meal simply because there was no one to show them how. Within 6 months of admission, most residents suffered from parasites and pneumonia, and the incidence of hepatitis was 100%. Emotional trauma resulting from being left together, unattended, was widespread.
We would go there once, and we found his fingers crushed. He got caught them in the door. We'd come there another time, we found his leg broken. How did that happen? They know more. Nobody knew nothing. They were short of staff, and they had other clients to bring in, so they gave them a time limit to eat. Now, you're taking profoundly retarded children, and you want them to eat by themselves. They don't know how to eat. Half the stuff was on the floor. They've eaten off the floor. It was just one holy mess. I said, oh, God, I got to get this kid out of here. But where am I going to go with him?
My mom would immediately start to, upon Lewis's arrival, examine his body for marks, for signs. That was her way of finding out how Lewis was being cared for. I, being the oldest, was always sort of thrown in the forefront and expected to ask all the questions. I remember questioning a doctor one time in the state school. Here I was, this 13-year-old Puerto Rican kid asking this, I don't know how old, white doctor about my brother and how and why he could be slapped or abused like that. Basically, the doctor looked down toward me and told me to shut up. He told me to shut up.
I had to cut her hair because at Willowbrook they didn't take care of my child's hair, so it was matted. I was all stuck together, so I had to clip her hair off in order for them to keep it clean. Also, her toes and fingers was stuck together from not being oiled, and she accumulated a certain type of odor within her body, and I think that comes from a neglect of not being bathed often and not being clean.
They brought Patty to Willowbrook, and they couldn't visit for another 6 months because that was, that was good. In those days, it was felt that was okay because you had to get the separation. And my mother said when she went back, it was the worst day of her life. That she went back and saw her baby, You think of how hard it must be for a parent to give up their babies and say, no, somebody else has to take care of them. And the day they walk away and they have to give over their child. It's so sad.
I visited the State Institution for the Mentally Retarded, and I think that particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit. It's
been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willowbrook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside. He pleaded then for an overhaul of a system that allowed retarded children to live in a snake pit. But that was way back in 1965, and somehow we'd all forgotten.
For me, Willowbrook really was a watershed in terms of emotional catharsis. It was, you know, I was a very experienced local reporter by the time I went to Willowbrook. I had seen people dead by gunshots and dead by fire and dead by riot and all the other urban mayhem. So in that sense, I thought I had experienced the depths of the human experience. Willowbrook, though, was so much worse than anything I had seen. A friend of mine, Dr. Michael Wilkins, called me and said he was quitting Willowbrook because the conditions were so abysmal that he could no longer tolerate, no longer in good conscience stay there, and that children were being abused behind the walls of the wards there. I said, that's interesting, Mike, but there are laws protecting the privacy of the people in those institutions, and they're locked. He said, well, the laws are preventing people from seeing a horror, and I can get you a key. When I stepped into that ward and threw open that door with my stolen key, it was the defining moment of my life.
What?
You know, I can't think of that 25 years later without remembering it in a way that, you know, I said at the time, a quarter century ago, I said, this is what it looked like, this is what it sounded like, but how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, it smelled of death. You can't treat humans like dogs in a kennel. There is no place where you can mass produce care, compassion, and concern for people. It is impossible. It is fundamentally unsound. The assembly line works for cars. It does not work for people. People need humanity. They need the spirit of compassion. They need to be loved. They need to be able to fulfill their potential, whatever their potential is, however limited or infinite their potential might be. They need an option. They need the opportunity to realize human potential.
How long have you been at Willowbrook?
18 years.
How long were you given physical therapy in school?
5 years.
Are you still going to school?
No.
Why?
I'm over age.
You're too old?
Yes.
Would you like to go back to school?
Yes, I do.
What would you want to learn if you went back to school?
Learn not my reading more.
Learn how to read?
Yeah.
How is it living on the ward that you live?
Disgrace.
Some of the residents at Willowbrook weren't even supposed to be there. At the age of 3, Bernard was misdiagnosed as being mentally retarded and was placed at Willowbrook. He remained there for 18 years before it was discovered that he, in fact, suffered from cerebral palsy. He was physically, not mentally handicapped.
It's hard to express myself at that time because I was never encouraged on look at yourself. You're bright, you mean, or you're very intelligent. And it was frustrating because it was like living in hell. There was no privacy. It was like living in a concentration camp. I've been beat so many times when I lived at Willowbrook. I got beaten with sticks, keychains, keys, they kicked my head through the wall. I mean, you name it, I had it. I've always thought I was gonna die in the institution because none of my family came to see me that often. They came about every 5-10 years. And the saddest thing is on Sundays when parents will come visit their kids, and I look out the window to see who will come to see me. And when the clock struck 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was disappointing because nobody came to visit me or brought me cookies, ice cream, or toys and stuff like that. Yeah.
Many people assume that the human stories from Willowbrook ended when the institution was forced to close its doors. In fact, that was only the beginning.
It's a very hard type of thing to have somebody who's developmentally disabled in your family. I know when I was younger, I knew Patty looked different, but I didn't really think too much about it. But I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And I remember one day being in the butcher's in the neighborhood. And I looked up, and on the counter of the butcher's shop was this canister. And on the canister was a picture of a child. And it said, "Donations for Mongoloids." And I remember looking up and I said, "Oh, gee, Ma, they look just like Patty." And my mother was rather startled and kind of tried to shush me up. And it dawned on me, well, gee, how could that be that there are other people that look like Patty? And why doesn't Patty looks like us, but she doesn't truly look like us? And I guess that was the first time that I had a name to this terrible thing that removed Patty from the family. You give birth to a child that doesn't meet society's standard. Already that places a burden on the parent to be the sibling and represent maybe society's answer to the standard becomes kind of a burden also. You know, why is it Patty? Oh, thank God it's not me. Should I be doing something else? Do I have an accountability here? Should there be something else I'm doing? You know, when can you put that type of burden down?
I tried not to think about it, but it was always hard, you know. I never wanted to leave her behind. I always wanted to take her home with us.
I was so frightened that there was something wrong with Patty and she got put away. You know, so what happens to me, you know, and as a kid having these great fears about doing something bad and being put away. Not being able to understand the experience as a child. When we were being raised, that a lot of times when we were in school, our mother would make that trip herself on Wednesdays out to Willowbrook without telling anyone. And the doorway would open just a crack, and our sister Patty would burst out, barrel right into my mother with a big hug and stuff. And that was it.
She was really strong, and it must have taken a really strong person to leave your child in a place like that. She took it a lot better than my father was able to handle it.
We never got to discuss that. We never talked about it. It's just something we knew. that it was hard for our father to talk about it, to spend his time with Patty.
Most men feel a child who's not quote-unquote normal is a reflection, I think, on their ability as a man. And I mean, even though we know it's not true, but it was hard for him to accept. You know, he loved her dearly, and she meant everything to him, and vice versa. Everything was always Daddy. She'd come home and she'd visit, and he'd be sitting in his favorite chair all the time, and he always had a flat top crew cut. And every time she'd come over to him at the chair and Mahata, right? To Daddy?
To Daddy's hair?
All the time. That was always the way she expressed her affection to him. She was really attached to him.
I think one of the most profound things I saw was when my father died. And we had discussed as a family what we were going to do with Patty. Patty always had the unique ability to know when somebody had died in our family. And that was always very startling to us. And we met as a family to decide what are we going to do with Patty, because Patty certainly should be informed. Patty's part of the family. And Patty needs to know. But how will Patty react to this? We made arrangements with the group home to bring Patty over to the funeral home. My mother was very nervous about it. And I gotta admit, most of us were pretty nervous. And Patty came in with, I think, 2 of the workers from the group home. And everybody started to cry. And Patty looked around. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she didn't quite know what. And I grabbed Patty by the hand and we went up to the casket. And Patty, in all of her profound retardation, looked down at my father and said, "Dead." I said, "Yeah, Daddy's dead."
We cried about the lost times that Patty wasn't able to share with Daddy because she didn't live at home. And the simple joys that Patty got of just having my father tease her and stuff made Patty's life so full.
To Patty, my father was God. It was the one that she focused her most attention on. It often made him uncomfortable. It was just very hard.
Who's that?
Daddy.
Patty was an adorable child. Patty, as she grew older, was no longer adorable, except maybe in the eyes of her family.
She's just love. You know, just pure, innocent love. Maybe in a funny shaped box, right? But it's love. It's, you know. When I was first married, they came up once to visit, and they brought Patty in for the trip up, and Katie and Una, Patty and my mother, we went to a apple orchard, and I wasn't really not that exposed to others other than Patty. And when we went up there, Patty was going around the store, and she was touching things and making all kinds of sounds and stuff. And I was trying to tell her not to touch this and that, and she was getting angry at me. So she started to talk quite loudly and carry on. And I got so embarrassed by her behavior that I couldn't stay with her. I felt like everybody was watching me, you know, everybody was staring. So I knew Katie and Una were right nearby, so I walked away from her.
Alright.
Because I was embarrassed. But now, from working with them, I would never walk away. I've learned that I shouldn't worry about what other people think. love you, right?
Louis has kept the family together. Because Lord knows I didn't want to be as involved as I am with a disabled brother. I didn't want to find myself arguing with doctors and nurses and physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech therapists. It's been a struggle for me, even to this day, with having to sort of undo and deal with at the same time the 20 or so years of psychological and emotional distress that my mom has gone through, my family has gone through, that I've gone through, and that Louis obviously has gone through. It's been good for my mom because she's kept her sons around. It's been difficult because I've had to make a lot of sacrifices. He feels pain and happiness just like everybody else. I'd say it's by a miracle of God that he's still with us, but also, I'd like to think that a little of that credit is also because of the involvement of family. I have yet to form a family of my own, and hopefully someday I will. But I'll tell you, time is running by. Not that I'm using Louis as an excuse, but there's a lot that's required in caring for my disabled brother. It becomes a 24-hour responsibility, 365 days a year. I rely on my mom because my mom is able to have that extra sense of a mother in knowing when something's wrong with Louis. I don't have that sense. And see, Louis will laugh because Louis is well aware of what his brothers can do for him or his family member can do and what his mother can do. I tip my hat to Louis because Louis has adapted to his surroundings and has adapted to his limitations, and in place of those things, Louis has developed that smile to hopefully warm you over if you're a stranger. And in place of his limitations, Louis has developed his sounds, the gleam in his eye, the worried look that he puts when something is not to his liking. Louis is manipulative. Louis is very manipulative.
You want that boo?
As soon as he sees his mom come in, he'll start giving directives. And mom will accommodate. Mom will accommodate. Sometimes so that I have to tell Mom, Louis is manipulating you, manipulating us. We have to keep an eye on that because it's so, at times I get the sense that there may be no satisfying Louis. Louis may just get a kick out of being manipulative and seeing the cause and effects of his actions. So in certain ways, that's his way of controlling the environment. Louis also had certain, I guess, fresh side to him. He obviously knew a man was aware and attracted to the opposite sex, so he would kick his way over to next to the woman or the lady visiting my mom, and gradually his hand would work its way up the dress.
What do you want next? Feeding, hat, shoes. What next? Woman. You want a woman? A woman over there? Come on. You see?
I would visit Louis on Sundays. Louis was kicking. And Louis was, he was going off and he was expressing his way of expressing happiness. Louis was kicking. And he was excited about his visitors. And I was happy to see the reaction I was getting from my brother. He was glad to see me. I grabbed Louis from the attendant and I wheeled him around the corner. And as we rounded the corner, Louis's happiness and actual excitement suddenly died. Louis became very somber and quiet. It suddenly hit me. Louis was hoping to see his mom and not me. So it's like, you bum, I came out here to visit you, and this is the greeting I get simply because mom isn't around? But at the same time struggling with the guilt about it's not his fault that he is responding the way he is. It's not his fault. It's as a result of his limitations. It's as a result of being removed from his mom, from his dad, and only seeing them for 3 hours every 7th day. There have been moments where I felt jealous, I felt angry, and I've tried to, in certain ways, express that to my mom because I think it's something she doesn't realize, takes for granted. I think she expects for us to understand. And so, with that expectation, it's a non-issue as far as she's concerned. She assumes we all understand. But I think at times I try to point out to my mom that, yes, Louis does require a lot from all of us. But it should not necessarily mean that we should neglect or ignore the fact that we all, as her children, require also some attention as well. And we're all, in certain ways, there's a little selfish side to all of us. But I think all of us, Jimmy, my sister, myself, put things in perspective because the bottom line is that we have the ability to express ourselves and advocate for ourselves, whereas Louis doesn't. From that, we draw understanding, hopefully.
I love all my sons, but I noticed I put a special for him because it's different. He can walk, he can talk, he can eat, and ¿cómo se dice? Le tengo un amor con más pena.
She says she feels a special love with him with a certain degree of pity.
I remember also when I put in Willowbrook, he passed too much. ¿Cómo se dice? Sufrimiento.
When he was in Willowbrook,
Yes, that's what happened. My other kid all the time with me. And he passed too much. But I love all my kids. I don't want nobody jelly because he passed too much when he's small. I remember when he's with me, he lived with me 5 years. I remember my son in my big apartment walk in the walk chair. Walk all this and very, very, ¿cómo se dice? Active. And when I put my son in Willowbrook, for what? For dying. So that's what happened with me. I put special attention. Somebody killed my son because he can eat fast. My son can eat fast. He had a feeding too. Why? Because he can eat fast. And that's what happened. That's what happened. I come every day here because I don't trust nobody now because I pass too much. Sorry, my son, but I love all my sons. But what's happened with me?
The last 25 years have brought a lot of changes. Many institutions, such as Willowbrook, have, through public pressure, litigation, and government reform, been phased out in favor of home care, group homes, alternative forms of education, and social integration.
Here we go. You want me to put blush on?
Yeah.
All right, you face me. Turn around. Turn around. 20 years younger. All right, now. I don't think there's enough words to really express the fact that Patty finally has a life. And doing real well. Having a boyfriend. Getting into the normal fights people get into. Having the last word, which she always had, even in Willowbrook. But having normal relationships, and that's really terrific. To be around other people and have a quality of life.
In Willowbrook, Patty could have nothing. She had no wall to put anything up in. There was no bureau. There were no closets for her. But now this is a big step. You know, the fact that she has pictures up on her wall and picture of the family up here, and she has her stuffed animals and her trophies there. It's really now her home.
Home.
Right, Patty?
Yeah.
Keeps it so neatly, too, right?
Patty Ann keeps her own room. She keeps it nice and neat, right?
You make your own bed?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And you help with the dishwasher?
Yeah.
Yeah. You help the secretary downstairs?
Right.
Yeah, what are you going to show us? Back to answering the phones.
See,
Well, that was the other
secretary.
thing. In Willowbrook, Patty could never make a phone call home. There were no phones, and the residents weren't allowed to make phone calls home. But now, she can use the phone anytime she'd like. And call whoever she'd like. And God knows who she's calling.
Now it's good in comparison with the other place. Sometimes I have my problem, but it's much better, sure.
Here, Lewis is dealt with as an individual, as a person. Here, Lewis is cared for. The family plays a very active role. We are no longer isolated, removed. We're not just kind of simply looked at as visitors. Let's go. There we go.
Eventually, Bernard was released from Willowbrook. Subsequently, he was appointed to a consumer advisory board whose job it was to monitor the problems and improvements at institutions like Willowbrook.
I could have a real good education. I could have been a lawyer today. I've always wanted to be a civil rights attorney. If I felt glad, I would not be a good contributor to our society. And no, I gotta go on with life. That's behind me. It gets a lot better from here.
Now, after all that you've gone through, do you think that you deserve the best?
You're damn right I deserve the best. Yes. I earned it. Yeah. We all do. Not only me. Everybody. Everybody deserves the best.
Undoubtedly, the public consciousness has been raised over the past several decades. The Special Olympics, with representatives from over 70 countries around the world, is a testament, a powerful demonstration of renewed priorities.
Anyone who has life in them is a human being with all sorts of potential. Willowbrook taught me that first they are human beings, and then disabled.
we'll have people who are disabled all the time, and somebody will come up with a bright idea, then maybe it's good if we put a lot of people together, and maybe a lot of folks who are disabled together in one place. And that'll save a lot of money. And the circle will be begun again of a place called Willowbrook. And I see it as a personal mission to make sure that that doesn't happen.
People with disabilities in general are no different than you and I. They just need a little more attention.
Everybody's not the same. Everybody's different. People have to have, it's entitled to different treatments, different types of food, different way of dressing, different ways of approaching the individual. My focus is always been treat the people like they're individuals.
Patty is just like the rest of us. She may look different, but she has the same needs, the same rights, the same wants as everybody here. And that's an important lesson for all of us to learn. You know, Patty's no different.
Many people say, no, you can't put that group home here, not in my backyard. We have to make sure that as community members that we accept group homes in our neighborhoods and keep them part of the community, as opposed to when Patty was born, keeping them away from the community.
Every time that we want to open up one of these group homes in their community, people shy away from them like they have Lord knows what they have. And we don't want them here, we don't want them here. They don't know that it could happen to their kids too, or their grandchildren. And I just want to have some compassion, because so far, those people haven't hurt anybody. I never heard of a retarded person rape anybody, hurt anybody. If not, they're the ones that are the victims.
The integration of the developmentally disabled into mainstream society, I think that is the triumph of the Willowbrook saga.
Here we are 25 years later, and that which was not possible, not even thought of, is now very much possible. I think the future holds a lot of promise, but there's still a lot that we have to go through. There's still a lot of resentment, opposition, lack of understanding, and in turn lack of acceptance.
Willowbrook was much more than an institution, it was an attitude. It was an attitude of disrespect to people with handicapping conditions. And that can very easily happen again if any of us turn our backs on these folks.
If you put people in an artificial environment, they will not evolve in a normal way. It is so basic that I can't imagine how all those schools of psychiatry, all those schools of psychology, all those medical schools, how they missed the point these many, many decades. It is shocking to me that the average Joe or Jane in the street knew more about what was right for the developmentally disabled than all the experts on the planet.
I just wish the public could see my son. We never want to see this happen again. And I hope for the future that it'll never be forgotten.
People like Marguerite was entitled to live. That was my main thing. She had to live. I felt that she had to live before she died and enjoy life before she died. She's brought me more joy than I think I brought to her. And I wouldn't let nothing or anyone separate me and my child.
Louis has gone a long way and will go a long way. I don't think I want to be around when he's not around. Let's put it that way. He does mean a lot to all of us.
My future is bright. I mean, I'm looking for nothing but the best for myself. I mean, I'm 46 years old, for God's sake. This is just the beginning.
I think that the indignities that the families and Patty, the people who live there, and the staff who work there suffered should never have happened. Absolutely. And it was worse, I really believe it was worse than death. Because when somebody dies, you can mourn their passing and move on. But Willowbrook was, and is for many people, a perpetual mourning. the mourning never stops for the missed opportunities the families had of being together, of families broken up, parents not talking about it.
Often during the visits that we had at Willowbrook, we would have this man sitting with us, a religious gentleman, Jewish, wore a hat, had the locks. He was the gentlest man I ever knew, and I didn't really think too much about it. Years later, after Willowbrook closed, I reminded my mother of this gentleman. And she told me the saddest story that I had ever heard, which was this gentleman, when his son was born, it was apparent that he had Down syndrome, and he told his wife that the child had died. To his family, that child was dead, and he was the only living person that knew that the son existed. And he would walk from someplace in Brooklyn to the ferry, take the ferry over to Staten Island, visit with his child for maybe an hour, and go back home. I often think about that man, because he always seemed old to me then. And I guess at this point he probably is dead. And his son is nobody's child at this point.
Louis gets the greatest pleasure from a bird flying in the air, the breeze hitting his skin, the honking of the cars as they drive by and he sees them go by. So I've gotten a better appreciation of the senses and how important human contact is to Louis, how important the tone of voice is to someone like Louis, the pressure of a touch. Because see, these are all of the things that my brother would, in his way, figure out from a person. Because it was that person who his life was dependent upon.
The legacy of Willowbrook will live on. But for the survivors and their families, the continuing struggle and persistent courage needed to live day by day is never forgotten. Patty, Louis, and thousands of others are not our burdens. They represent the best part of ourselves. The part of us that instinctively knows the importance of shared responsibility. And a part of us that needs to learn from those that can truly teach us about the miracle of living.